we might proceed. We have a few more people that have registered that'll probably trickle in through the day, but there's no reason to delay getting started with this wonderful group of people in the room. My name's Pia Andrews. Welcome to the Gov2O Taskforce 10 Years On event. This should be a fun and interesting day. We have a few volunteers in the room I just want to quickly acknowledge, and then I'm going to hand over to our host to welcome us to this wonderful place. But just very quickly to acknowledge Alison Kershaw, Gavin and Kristin Milton as our key volunteers that have brought all this together, and Ruth Ellison, who has literally just texted me, who is home with with 2 children and food poisoning right now. We love you, Ruth, and we hope that everyone recovers quickly. She's probably tuning in online right now. And a big welcome as well to all those who are coming remotely. So I might just invite Mark Evans from the Museum of Australian Democracy.
Thank you, Pia. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting this morning, and recognise their unique contribution to our environmental and cultural heritage, past, present, and future. And I extend our respect to all Indigenous people in attendance here this morning. Well, on behalf of the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House, I would like to welcome you to this important day of discussion, reflection, and hopefully action on digital transformation. As Pia said, my name's Mark Evans, and I'm Director of the Democracy 2025 Bridging the Trust Divide initiative, which is based here in the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House. Now, we're called Democracy 2025 because our research tells us that if current trends continue, no more than 1 in 10 Australians will trust their politicians and political institutions by 2025. So our purpose is to drive a national conversation on how we can strengthen democratic practice, celebrate our democratic achievements, and be the best democracy that we can be. So we audit the qualities of Australian democracy, we investigate and experiment with what works in terms of renewing our representative system of government, and we help to facilitate and support conversations such as this one on how to improve our democratic practice. And it is wonderful to see so many inspiring practitioners from all over Australia coming together to focus on what Democracy 2025 views as a key methodology for bridging the trust divide. Digital technology has such democratic practice, but it's currently being deployed more effectively as a tool of disempowerment rather than a tool of empowerment. We are failing to ignite digital imagination in democratic practice. And as our new exhibition will tell you, and that's just opened yesterday, it's on freedom of the press. It shows that increasing distrust in government is leading to more risk-averse and closed government. Despite being told that we live in an era of open government, we are seeing greater control of information. So look, I hope we can start reversing that trend today and develop a project of renewal that both defines the challenge but makes the change. So welcome to Old Parliament House and have a memorable day. Thank you.
What a fantastic start to the day. Thank you so much, Mark. So we've just got a couple of things to kick the day off, and Alison's going to talk to you about how the day is going to work. I'm just going to cover a couple of specifics first. So just to repeat the acknowledgement of the Ngunnawal people of the Eora Nation. We really are privileged to be here, and it's, I think, one of those areas that we could explore about for the next 10 years. Thank you all for giving up your time. It's a Saturday. People have come from Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, and ACT today in person, which is quite a big deal. This is one of those opportunities where we can figure out what we can do differently and what we can do. This day is not about pointing fingers or waiting or saying, well, that should have been done differently. This is about reflecting and looking at what we can do next and coming up with those actions. So a huge thank you to our sponsors, briefly, to Core Delta, who were very generous in being our core corporate sponsor, the Museum of Australian Democracy, of course, for being our venue support and sponsor, and to TheMandarin, whom we do have for everyone's information, we do have Harley Dennett from TheMandarin here as well, who's going to be reporting from the day, so if there's anything you don't want to, just so you know, he's there. Alison will talk about the recording aspects in a second and about the anonymity that we're trying to maintain for today. But just so you know, generally speaking, the recording will be up here, won't it? It won't be out there.
I might do a little bit of movement with this camera, but if you sit at the back, it's a very wide shot. So
Yeah, okay. So we'll give you some information about that in a second. But the toilets are outside, food will be served outside, there's coffee, tea, juice, water and stuff throughout the day. And if there's anything else that you need to know, then there's me, Kristin, Gavin or Alison to ask. So please do come up if you have any issues throughout the day. So I might pass over to Alison to explain how the day is going to work.
Hi. The day is going to work in 3 parts. So welcome to part 1. You made it. That's great. I'm going to do a bit of talking. Then we're going to hear from Nicholas Gruen. And then Pia will do some talking. I'll do some more talking. And then we have a break. Hooray. So about 11 o'clock, we'll stop for some morning tea. During that break, you can sign up for a bar camp session. Don't panic if you don't know what that is. We will take you through that. Then the second session will be the bar camp session, and we'll kick off with some primer talks. And then at 1 o'clock, we'll break for lunch. We're going to have an hour for lunch because we all know the good conversations usually happen over food and tea and coffee, so we wanted to leave time for good chats. And then the third session is action stations, ! And then we will wrap up with some reflections. So just so you know what's being streamed and what isn't, and if you don't want to participate in the stream, that's absolutely fine. What we'll do is all of the talks at the beginning will be streamed. And yes, there may be for some colour and movement in the stream because I'm amazing, but, you know, not that interesting. There might be some wide shots. And then in the bar camp, what we'll do is if you don't want to be streamed, come at the end and we'll turn the stream off. So if you don't want to be streamed, that's fine, but we'll save those till the end and then we'll turn the stream off. And then the reflections at the end of the day will be streamed. So it won't be going all day. So because we want to encourage, what did they say, frank and fearless conversations? Yeah, but if you've got any questions or concerns, come and have a chat. We will be taking a few photos, but actually they always look better from the back of the room anyway. If you don't want to be in a photo that might end up on social media, just let us know and we'll make sure that doesn't happen. There is a hashtag that was up on the slide, hashtag govteams 10 years on. So join the conversation that's happening. You can add questions to the Slido and we'll address them as we go. Sign up on the whiteboard. Whoops. And yeah, if you find the hashtag, if you want to share it, the YouTube link is on there. Either I've tweeted it, Pia's tweeted it. So if you know that there are folk who aren't here that might want to just, you know, grab a cup of tea and dip in and out of the stream, yeah, that's up on, definitely up on Twitter. So just find the hashtag and you'll find the link to the YouTube. That's my bit done.
What we'll do is we'll jump into, so there's the link if you want to put questions on. In the 3 sessions, we'll be doing the questions from that same Slido, so slido.com/gov20 10 years on, the word 10 rather than the number. And we shall jump to Nicholas Gruen to give us a bit of a presentation. Now, Nicholas, for those, I'm sure everyone knows Nicholas, but for those that don't, was the chair of the Gov2O task force and is a bit of a luminary in trying to drive change and improvement and reform in government. So, welcome, Nicholas.
What's happened to my slide? That was such a cool slide. It had had a buggy, you know, at the trots, but in front of it was a hippopotamus. Visual gags explained aren't all that good, but there you go. So I've only got 15 minutes, so that's what we were charged with. I added the highlighted bit because it struck me when I went back over the stuff what an incredible job we did, and that's what led me to give you the sort of tagline for my talk, which is Government 2.0 Task Force ahead of its time, 1 decade, more ahead of its time the next. Things have got worse in respect of the things that I cared most about. That's the first thing we did, which is we held a competition. And then we got into trouble. We encountered the Twitter storm because we didn't pay, as I recall, we didn't pay a prize, and that's okay with me. It won't be okay with some other people. I certainly understand why some designers were upset, but I give my time away for the public good all the time. And it seemed to me, well, I don't want to personalise that, he said, having just personalised it, but I want to generalise it, which is that should be a very normal thing to do, which isn't to say that paying a prize would have been a bad thing either. That is our issues paper. It's way ahead of its time. It's about as ahead of its time as it was when we launched it. Note this, it is a final issues paper, so we issued a beta. It's not hard, it's really easy. You say, hi, we're the Productivity Commission. This is our first final draft. We'll open it up for comments and so on. But the sort of cheap, performative nature of government, the fact that you can never use words like hunch in government, as I discovered when I went to the Australian Centre for Social Innovation and they kept talking about their hunch, and I sort of got culture shock the moment someone talked about a hunch. And of course, not only can't you talk about it outside in government, where you'll be crucified by the media, so there's good reason why you don't, but you can't really do it inside either, because everyone's going through the role play. Yes, it's all in hand, Minister, whatever the hell it is you just told us, which we can't really quite figure out. Notice that each paragraph, we're trying to encourage discussion, and people can comment on any paragraph, they can comment generally, we're trying to get discussions going and so on. There was GovHack at the first competition of its kind in government in the world. Thank you to Seb Chan and Mia Garlick for proposing that. I didn't really know what the hell it was till I went along to it and was just blown away. It was fantastic. And a blog on which we explained our thinking as it was going and invited comments. You can still find it on archive.org. It's really there is really some fantastic discussion there. So we were trying to model Inquiries 2.0. I was sort of running around the place using this little diagram, saying that the internet and the ethos of the internet and the ethos of blogs and so on provided a new, less structured way of generating expertise and tapping into expertise and so on. I think that diagram isn't mine. I think it's David Weinberg's, but that's 10 years ago and I'm not sure. The inquiry had a tremendous sense of doing as well as talking. The rather awkward term do tank has sort of come into existence, a do tank as opposed to a think tank, and we were trying to do and think, and I think that most think tanks could do with a little bit of doing. because so much of what happens in government we need to learn something from doing it. And there are many things that could be done in such inquiries. Here's something fairly close to my heart, which is something that I wrote for the Sydney Morning Herald when I discovered Julie Hempenstall had corrected 500,000 lines of code on the what's now called Trove. It was then the National Library newspaper digitisation site. And I tried to paint a picture in which we see the problem of public service as a problem of picking people who care about public service. Of course, we want to pay them, give them a career structure, but we want them there. But these are historical artefacts, which are my slides from endless talks around the place. But these are two bloggers. Tanta is on the left, and she ended up in US Federal Reserve research for doing nothing more than blogging. She was an expert on the subprime situation, or rather she'd worked in subprime. And there's my now friend Steve Randy Waldman, one of my favourite economists in the world, hasn't actually got himself a PhD or anything much, but like Nassim Nicholas Taleb taught himself economics because he needed to actually figure out the world because he was a trader. Anyway, the pitch about this is that there's Mike Conzile still blogging away, a great blogger but of no official standing in the economics community. There's his name tag, and he is at a discussion of and there's Steve Randy Waldman, and they're at a discussion of the US Treasury. This is in 2009. Pretty impressive stuff, I think. That was our international reference group. I might say more than half of those people agreed to do it, and then we never saw them again, which is fine. That's called failing fast and succeeding sometimes, and failing on things that don't, so who cares? And we got some fantastic input, and I'll just show you very quickly some of their comments. This was from my, a letter of conveyance to the government, and I tried to make it a report which firstly was written in English, was a report of ideas and argument, and addressed itself to the time-honoured and hard-won traditions of modern democratic government. It wasn't supposed to be a fad. It was supposed to try and use new technologies to revivify the way we did things in a modern democracy. That's some of the international reaction, which I won't dwell on, but you can all have a look at the slides. They're really pretty amazing. And some of the people, there's Tom Watson, who's maybe still the deputy leader of the opposition in the UK. Is he resigned? He's resigning. He's resigning, but I don't know. Anyway. Yeah. Is he? But he's still the. I know he's leaving Parliament, but he's the. Anyway. Who cares? Our report was translated into Korean. I discovered as I arrived in Korea and was handed this report. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That's more reactions, and now some of the issues, some of the Kool-Aid that some people were swallowing at the time. This is a friend of mine, Joe Trippi, who Lindsay Tanner introduced me to, who had just published a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I was highly sceptical of this because, well, I won't say because I knew what was going to happen, but it didn't strike me as inherently plausible that suddenly, I think of democracy as a constructed thing, not as a thing that you just fall into, having, for instance, invaded a country. Anyway, there were lots of people saying that sort of thing. The New Zealand police were getting the story all around the world that they let the New Zealand public write the laws. I had a long conversation with a guy in the New Zealand Police Corps who, he was one of the people who got this story about. He was rather pleased with himself, but he, not in so many words, admitted that it was more or less a hoax. that they'd had a wiki and they'd picked, and somebody'd suggested a section and they'd written a section. It was something like that. This is again an historical artefact, me trying to make the point that just having suggestions might not be too terrific. One of the suggestions in the UK government at the bottom is make the Labor Party illegal, ban them, money wasters, and something similar happened in Obama with an exercise that Obama was running. Again, as an historical takeout, these are some of the messages I was trying to give. Enthusiasm counts, empower your doers, experience matters, get as much as you can. You don't need to take big risks, and you shouldn't. Take small risks. And complacency is an option. Don't bother. Well, that was a bit of Kool-Aid, I might say, because what we've seen since these words were spoken has been complacency. Now, there was one sense in which it was true, which is that you get yourself a Twitter storm if you do something. If you do something which is dumb, but you also get yourself a Twitter storm if you do something that can be argued as dumb. So I'll pass up on that one. And here's an organisation that has not been complacent. This is Bank Underground, the Bank of England, which is the equivalent. We have the Reserve Bank of Australia, it's the central bank, and it has an extremely vigorous blog in which researchers publish stuff and help figure stuff out and put up half ideas and work stuff through. We have very little like that in Australia, and yet, and I can understand why line departments find that hard, but we have lots of agencies that are independent. We've protected their independence with legislation, and what do we get for it? Nothing much, because they just can't wait to behave just like public servants. It's amazing. Might have something to do with the fact that they're in the same career structure, but there you go. So I've written a bit about that. This is the equivalent front page of a current Productivity Commission issues paper. I've used the Productivity Commission as a kind of a benchmark because I'd come from the Productivity Commission. I'd spent 4 years there, not that long before this exercise. And one of the first things I said was, and in fact I was trying to do this in the Productivity Commission, is move the terms of reference to the back. They're not public facing, their code, and so on. Well, there you go. So these are a bunch of slides that I showed. I'm going to talk about, I don't have that much time, so you can tell that I'm not going to talk that much about data. I thought I'd just show you that where we were on the data story in 2009 was encapsulated by the New South Wales Department of Transport suing people who were taking their bus timetables and putting them up on websites. So I was trying to say to people, hey, isn't this a bit strange? And so these were all these examples of how in Boston they'd released data, then they'd released real-time data, and how quick, within 1 hour it started turning up on Google Maps. Within 2 days it was on. It was starting to be used really properly, and then it turned up on mobile phones. You know, the iPhone was 2 years old, and it was there. You can see it after 8 weeks turning up properly on an iPhone. That was something that came and went fairly quickly, I can tell you that. This was a nice example of Crisis Commons in Christchurch. Tim McNamara, if I've got the name right, was, if he's not, yes, just did a terrific job, and had somewhat Kafkaesque experiences with various government agencies, but they sort of tried to make sense of it and help. So I won't talk for that much longer, but did want to talk to you about Lord Atkin's law. Some of you will know that Lord Atkins said that rowing was the perfect preparation for public life because it enables you to go in one direction while you're facing in the other. And that's essentially that has been the problem in lots of other areas of government. And essentially, again, this is a slide from a few years ago, but my term for this is that the arteries are willing and the capillaries are weak. So essentially, we got our recommendations. We got our recommendations accepted, and then they weren't implemented because implementing them is hard, and the decision to implement them is made by the arteries in front of TV cameras and so on, and they make announcements, snap, snap, and then the detail needs to be done, and problems arise. The people who are trying to bring things about trying to bring it about with the best possible will, or many of them are, but problems arise and then things stop. This is regulation, is a story of this, and you don't need to hear about that from me, but this is going on in regulation and has been for 30 years. There's some comical stuff from the New South Wales Audit Office on how the moves to reduce regulation increase the complexity of regulation. The evidence-based policy from the Auditor General, the New South Wales Government's Program Evaluation Initiative is largely ineffective. No information is provided on the performance of programs that have been evaluated. That's handy. And so 8 years after our report, the Productivity Commission report came out and made all the same recommendations effectively and made some more comprehensive ones about data. And of course the punchline isn't that our recommendations weren't adopted, it is that they were adopted and they had to be made again. So welcome to the new problem, which is the arteries and the capillaries and rolling amnesia. There is some pretty extraordinary things going on in data availability in health. A nationally funded research project into vaccination is 7 years into a saga to be allowed access to Commonwealth and States data sets, and so on it goes. So we actually we used to think of this as a third world problem, which is that aid is given for nice shiny things that you can put ribbons on and not given for maintenance and stuff like that. But it's becoming a first world problem as well, not so much visually, but not so much in physical things, although that's a problem in the United States now, but in the way systems work. And we have a cult of announceables. This is a pretty good publication from the Institute for Government in London in 3 areas: further education, regional governments and industrial strategy. In industrial strategy, a new 15-year plan is released about every 4 years. I don't really need to say anything much, but that's welcome to the world. So this is again a slide from back then, and this is a slide where I said that if something was good, I would give it a big fat tick. If it was not so good, I would give it a big fat tick. And so this is my report card. Open engagement at all levels of government is integral to promoting an informed, connected and democratic community, to public sector reform, innovation and so on. Big fat tick. Public sector information, a small tick, I suppose. People are trying. We're doing less well than some countries, but certainly there's a lot more data around than there was. And as I said, I haven't talked much about data because lots of people here are right into that. And online engagement by public servants. So there you are. I don't know where the picture went. It was a good picture. But I did get something commissioned late last night, which is an update of a certain logo. And that was it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Nicholas. I am going to switch hats quite substantially for a moment and I'm actually going to represent, well, I'm not formally representing anyone, all the usual things that you have to say, which you all understand, but just to be clear. But I actually want to quickly put the public servant hat on as one of those people trying to implement from the inside. It's worth pointing out that, so I'm going to talk about what was implemented at the time officially. Then I'm going to talk about some of the points of brilliance, of which there's a number of people in the room that were involved in. Then I'm going to talk about how the transitions happened over the last 10 years, so far as I have seen, I guess, in government, in public sectors, particularly, obviously, in Australia, I'm trying to focus on, and then some of the lessons learned. So I'll just take 5 minutes to jump through these. But it's worth, first of all, saying AGMO were, at the time, nominated as the agency responsible for implementation for this program. Now, there's a first challenge, because this isn't a single agency implementation. This is a reform program, realistically. But a program was put together, and that program was delivered on. The program was delivered on within about 3 years. So there was a declaration of open government made. Difficult to find online now, but I found it, so I'm going to post it as part of the package for this. We re-released Data.gov.au, or we released Data.gov.au and then re-released it. The IP policy was changed to have Creative Commons by default, which was, huge in the world. That was huge. To have this government report, the government response to the task force actually published as a Creative Commons by default, was a huge deal at the time. There was social media guidance and training. How do I know? Because I wrote some of it. And there was a lot of nuance around the difference between official and professional communications. And professionals were encouraged and supported to engage online, and a lot of that happened. I worked at the time for John Sheridan, who did a lot of public speeches about the value of social media, and it was fantastic. The Gov2O awards were implemented, and there were other ones as well, like really good ones around innovation, and Craig helpfully pointed out there's a lot of really great awards that were done around the place. The official Gov 2.0 awards, though, were also established, and the OAIC was established as a part of this broader program. The GMO web guide was updated dramatically to include WCAG and accessibility guidance. The APSC guidance on engaging online was updated. It's been updated again since. But there was a lot of work by the National Archives. The Digital Archives report was done. Of course, there's been reports in that sense as well. But there was updated security guidance on cloud, and of course, GovHack 2009, the first, as Nicholas pointed out, run by John Alsop by Web Directions, and huge kudos and credit to them. And there's a few of the original GovHackers in the room here today as well. And that became the inspiration for a few of us to get together and start running GovHack as a community thing, again, of which a few of the originals are in the room today. AGMO achieved a lot, and quite often when people look at this whole agenda, we see the gaps more than what was achieved, but what was achieved was a lot at the time. There was also pockets of awesomeness around everywhere else. There was a lot of work happening in different states, so GovHack grew into community-run thing. Queensland Police, actually embraced Facebook as a mechanism for engaging with emergencies, and one of the key people, I would suggest the key person responsible for that's in the room today, and is just an absolute legend, and we should all... Very shy legend, but to bring such a traditional structure to be able to engage so effectively online to help people throughout emergencies and then moving forward as just general business was a big deal. South Australia did a lot of great work around open government, around open data, around participatory budgets, Creative Commons, again, online strategy consultations, and the Fab Lab, which we'll hear about more. Landgate, Western Australia, did public engagement hackathons. My region was extraordinary of its time, and there's people in the room, thank you, Greg, and others that were responsible for that. My school, GovDex, GovCMS, some extraordinary stuff that's happened over the last, in that sort of few years afterwards. Makerspaces, civic engagement, state of the environment, digital reporting, and a variety of improvements to service delivery were starting to happen, which of course then becomes how we've started to see the transition to digital. So we've had the Digital Transformation Agency obviously set up and various digital agendas across all the different governments. But this is where it starts to get really interesting, isn't it? Almost all of this stuff is about just the shift in service delivery, how we're going to improve government service delivery. And so it's sort of, digital is not necessarily seen so much as government engaging online unless it's as a marketing mechanism. And so we've sort of started to lose a little bit of that participatory governance part that the Gov2O task force really focused in on. But there is great work happening, transparency.gov.au, which some people don't know exists, but really trying to improve the access to public reporting. Digital twins provide some opportunities. The Open Government Partnership, Australia did join eventually, and there are rolling action plans that are happening around that, which are improving. Every government that joins the Open Government Partnership starts with something fairly basic, but then ramps that up, so that's been really great. The D10 got established only a few years ago. It was the D5, then the D9, now the D10. Australia is not one of those digital countries, but all of that, the actual tenets of the D10 are around openness, around open government, around open data, around you have to be a member of the Open Government Partnership to be in the D10, which is why Australia wasn't in the first round. There has been dramatic improvements to service delivery. You've had, there are improvements to MyGov, to Service New South Wales, Life Journeys, Rules as Code, and a whole bunch of people getting into around automation and AI and ethics strategies now. Of course, and I think that the key thing here, if we want to be realistic about this, is mileage is varied. It's probably the right way to put this. There have been a lot of efforts from a lot of people, but is the system as a whole embracing, I guess, the Gov2O ideas, the digital ideas, as a vessel for public sector reform? And I would argue probably not. So the lessons learned, these are my personal perspectives, is that Agimo did a good job and completed the job given to them. I was part of that team. I'm not just being defensive, but Agimo did actually do a lot of good work. But the Gov2O reform opportunity was always, as Nicholas so rightly put, it was always meant to be a reform agenda. And reform agendas can't ever really be squeezed into a single program delivered by a single agency. So if we want more than a program approach, if we want a systems approach, it requires something a lot broader, which I don't think was put in place. One of the other reports that was around the same time was the Head of the Game report. A similar thing happened. The Head of the Game report was given to one agency who then put in place a monitoring program of let's see what happens, and it wasn't really implemented to the heart of what it could have been. So the question, I think one of the questions for me from today and the lesson moving forward needs to be, how are we going to develop systemic responses to systemic problems? Because it's not going to happen in a single agency or a single program. So I'm going to hand over to Alison to share a bit of lessons about the intersection between government and citizens.
Okay. So most of you don't know me, but I'm originally from Adelaide, and I'm a recovering South Australian public servant. I just wanted to talk about, because everyone knows GovHack, there's a couple of t-shirts, Creative Commons, but I just wanted to hashtag humble brag about some of the stuff. I just wanted to talk about, sort of riffing off what Nicholas was saying about volunteers and how they have made a huge impact beyond GovHack. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of things that have happened in South Australia. And it is by no means comprehensive. It is by no means the only examples of these sorts of things. It's just that Pia asked me to talk about something, and this is what I decided to talk about. And in terms of being ahead of the game as well, I think it's really interesting. Some of the stuff we did in South Australia, we took very small risk, and we got quite big bang for our buck. And I know that there are examples all over Australia. So this is just a couple of things. So I want to talk about Fab Lab. The Australian Network for Art and Technology came to us and said, we have this idea, there's these things called Fab Labs, and we're like, they sound cool. And so we gave them a bit of money. The guy with the tie is the minister at the time, who was very happy to cut a ribbon with some laser cut scissors. We had a masterclass to kick it all off. And it started with $200,000, and TAFE gave us a room. We had some MakerBots. Anyone remember MakerBots? Back in the days when they were shipped as a kit. Top tip, they don't like cat hair. So if you have cats, don't build them in your house, because then there's a burning smell. It's not good. Anyway, so it was really small start. We literally had like 3 MakerBots. We managed to get some sponsorship, and Trotec lent us a very cool laser cutter. And it was really held together with chewing gum and string. ANAP managed to stretch the money out to 2 years and to be open 2 days a week. And then when the money ran out, we were like, oh. And so a bunch of us met in the pub. And we were like, well, we could, yeah, sure, yep, we can, yeah. So we formed a thing, we learnt how to register an organisation, ANAP gifted us all the kit, TAFE let us keep using the room, and we just kept going as volunteers. And what's been so amazing is that we've actually managed to attract some more funding. And this is some of the things that we did. You can laser etch sausages. Again, the smell is questionable. And for the record, yes, we did eat them. Well, I didn't, I'm a vegetarian, but yes, they were eaten. But what was really cool was we kept going, and we got various tiny little grants, National Science Week, and we did stuff. And then green industries kind of got interested because, of course, the maker movement is all about reuse, reduce, recycle, repair, repurpose, all of the R's. And so this is now Makerspace Adelaide, which is in a proper space. Look, it's big, and we have stuff, and we have things, and so many. The bottom right, for those playing along at home, is combat robots who use our workshop space to build their robots, and then they have competitions, which is really cool. And then, because of the interest in the maker movement, again, there's a theme. We met in a pub and went, yeah, we could totally do a maker fair. Yeah, great. Yep, that'd be amazing. No idea what the hell we were doing. 7,000 people turned up. Yay! That was a bit intense. Nobody expected that many people. We were like, if 1,000 people turn up, that'll be amazing. 7,000 people turned up. So far, we've had 4. The last one, we had 135 exhibits. Beautiful artworks. I deliberately didn't look when this was taken off the back of a ute because I'm like, it's just, yeah, great. In fact, the venue, this was actually, if anybody knows Adelaide, Maker Fair moved to Tonsley, which is the Innovation District. It's actually an old car factory. This is where Mitsubishi was, and they gutted the factory and left the floor and the roof, which is very cool. Lots of cool photos, people doing stuff. Hashtag humble brag. Yeah, but what was really interesting was the government was really surprised that people were into this stuff, and we're like, do you not understand how Australia works? Innovation starts in sheds and on kitchen tables, and then they join your beautifully curated entrepreneurship programs. There's a whole bunch of stuff that starts before, and when I think about kind of GovHack, and, you know, I was involved in South Australia, and now I see people 10 years later who have done things. So this is Will from Voxon Photonics. They built their first working prototype of a 3D holographic display. Yes, 3D holographic display, like Star Wars. They built their first working prototype in the Fab Lab. And about 2 years later, the two guys, Will and Gav, managed to quit their day job, and this is now their day job, and they employ about 25 people. Yay! This is another business that has come out of Fab Lab. Eden started as a volunteer. She now makes and sells these amazing badges and brooches. So they're beautifully laser cut creations, and this is how she makes her living now. So it's amazing where you can end up when you just a bunch of people meet in a pub and say, yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, this is a bunch of people who met in a pub, and that is a cake of our mascot that someone donated because they came and this was the thing that they showed off. So yeah, it's amazing what a bunch of people who meet in a pub can do. Thanks.
All right, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to quickly do the report card, which is the data from the survey that about 30 people participated in, and thank you, because it was a long survey, we understand that. But just quickly, a couple of things. Obviously, this isn't the report card yet. This is the work in progress, which will then be updated on the back of the conversations we have in the room right here. These are your thoughts, and they are many and varied, and the results are fascinating, I have to say, as a data nerd. But after I just quickly present some of the overarching themes that come through from the report, from the survey, we're going to break into a conversation and engage with each other. So just quickly, just in case it hasn't been obvious yet, no one's here to be their organisation or their role or their department or their sector. Please just engage with this conversation as a human, as a person who cares about improving things, and please engage kindly and respectfully, and embrace the complexity and the difficulty of the conversation that we're about to have, because that's how we'll come to useful next steps of what we need to do next. So, first, slightly nerdy things. The 30 or so people that participated, 80% were public servants. I'll send you out links of all of this just for interest. Obviously, it's all anonymised, but it's just interesting that 80% of the people that participated have worked in the federal government. There were a few that have had a child, a few that haven't worked for a while, a few that have studied, and there's a bunch. It's interesting that 45% have volunteered in some shape or form, which I think is, a little. It reflects the self-selecting community we have in front of us. This is the one that fascinates me, and I promised Gavin I wouldn't run over to the screen, so I'll try to not run over to the screen. But it's so interesting. So, hard left is significantly worse. So blue is significantly worse. Red, I'm really sorry for the colour, anyone that's got colour blindness. But hard left is significantly worse. Hard, then slightly worse, then about the same is the yellowish. Slightly better is green, significantly better is orange, and then the blue is better, and the hard right is both better and worse. We have a really split room. It's really, really interesting. It was really interesting to go through the answers and have people say, everything from mission accomplished to everything is doomed, and everything in between. And what that says to me, again, is part of what Nicholas was saying around institutional memory loss. There are things that have been achieved that aren't known to newcomers. There are things that have got better over the 10 years. There are things that have got worse over the 10 years, but there's also a lot of localization. James was making this point this morning. Experiences in one place might be completely different to experiences in another place. Experiences in the states and territories is completely different to the feds and from each other. So it was really interesting to see the data that came through. You all have on your tables a double printed thing which just has the schedule and the information about the day, but you also have a one-pager which just has the short list of all the recommendations, just to make it easy for you to engage in the conversation when we break in a moment. But just, so we have the Slido up that you can give responses, but before we jump into that, I'll just show you a little bit more of the data that came up. So I've got a report link, which I'll send out, but what we've tried to do is just do a bit of a reflection on some, not all, but some of the comments, a breadth of the comments that were made, and the breakdown of each of the recommendations. So those links are on this slide deck, which I'll send out right now, but what we wanted to do was really get people into the conversation about each of these recommendations. So I'll finish just with this last one just quickly. The top 3 to 5 recommendations that you believe need additional work for the people who responded effectively came down to, I brought the wrong up with me, maybe, I don't know if that'll help, probably not. Is that a little bit better? Okay, so recommendation 4, which one's that? Someone's got the piece of paper and I didn't bring it up with me. Indeed. Enabling public servants to engage online. There's definitely a theme coming through that's one of the biggest challenges. And just quickly, the other 2 that came up the highest were recommendation 2, to coordinate with leadership, guidance and support, a lead agency driving the agenda, and recommendation 6, which was to make public sector open, accessible and reusable, which interestingly, when you go back to the other slide, was one of the areas that people felt that we'd actually made a lot of progress in. So that there's a lot of interesting mixed results there. We want to jump straight into the first participatory session. So for those participating online or remotely, we're going to turn off the live streaming now in just a moment, but just to be brief, you can tune back in for the bar camp session at 11, and you can tune back in for the report at the end of the day at 3:30. But because we're going to be breaking now for just discussions, we'll turn off the live streaming now. So thank you all very much remotely. So we'll stop that. For the people in the room, and indeed for people remotely, but what we want you to do is to barriers identified and recommendations for them. And thank you for the people who thought that Nicholas, Craig, Pia should just get $10 million. That's very lovely of you. No, that wasn't for us. It was an info philanthropy fund administered by a volunteer group of folks. So apparently there's a shelf company in the making. Anyway, so, and I'm sure that the self-perpetuating AIs out there are reading this and building new businesses as we speak. So what we'll do is, I think a lack of whole systems approach. So there's a lot of feedback here about systems, actually through a lot of the different feedback, and a general acknowledgement that work has happened, but also things have regressed and we need to take a system approach to that. That's been really great. So we're going to shift into session 2, and it's my absolute delight and pleasure to invite someone who's been a huge part, if sometimes quietly, behind the scenes of driving a lot of change in the federal government in Australia. So I met Alex Roberts way back in these days, but he's got a background in DesignGov. So DesignGov was a set-up thing that was, when did it start up? 2012, 2013, well before things got very trendy in the rest of government to look at service design and UX and design thinking generally, and really drove a lot of people forward and got a lot of people thinking in that space very early, but also was responsible for setting up the Public Service Innovation Network as well, and many, many other things. But he's joining us from France today and is jet lagged as all, and so thank you so much for coming to join us and share with us about some of the findings about global innovation in governments around the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Pia. Now, I think it's important to note that while we're talking about taking a systemic approach and building up sophistication, sometimes it's the basics that get to you, like how to walk downstairs properly. It's not always as easy as you think doing the things that you think you should know how to do. So I come from the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation, which is a part of the Public Governance Directorate at the OECD. We've been around for a number of years now, and what we try and do is 3 broad things. Look at what are the emerging trends in innovation around the world, see what the emerging cases are from different governments. Every year we run a call for innovations to solicit cases from all around the world and look at what the implications of some of those trends might be. This year we featured the Better Rules as Code, for instance, project in New Zealand and a few others. We also look at then how do you turn the new into the normal, how do you embed the promising and embed it into business as usual. One of the big things we did this year was we helped finalise a declaration on public sector innovation, which was a commitment that 40 governments have adhered to, which is basically just a symbolic act of re-emphasising that innovation is something that matters. And we also look at providing trusted advice, such as we've done a couple of country studies with Canada and just released one last week with Brazil looking at their public sector innovation system. But why I'm here today is a bit to talk about some of the things we've seen. And that's basically that in the world we're in, we really require a more deliberate and systemic approach to public sector innovation. There are a lot of core features of the public sector as an institution that are necessarily and purposefully lean against innovation. There are things such as risk aversion and so on that are just core features of government. We can't really expect to avoid them, but we need to recognise those and mitigate that in a more deliberate approach. 3 things that we have seen starting to emerge by different governments and we think need to be encouraged. The first is, is innovation actually occurring to the extent that governments need? And we've got a model that I won't run through here, then there's vast amounts of pages I've written about it. But it's basically, it comes down to the fact that doing something new is harder than not doing something new. The status quo will win out in government unless there's a reason, possibility, capability, and experience for something new to occur. And if we're going to make innovation something that's systemic, then we need to change it from the situation which we have at the moment, which is so often reliant, in the cases that we see in countries all over the world, of exceptional individuals or individuals doing exceptional things, or organisations responding to crises or political windows of opportunity. We need more systemic drivers for change. Without that, the core sort of defaults will win out, and innovation will just be shaped by reactive forces rather than deliberate, which isn't really going to help us. The other thing we need to think about is that, is innovation actually occurring, the innovation that's occurring, likely to provide the right mix of options and choices for the context? There might be lots of innovation going on, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right sort of innovation. We need to have a bit of a spread, a bit of a portfolio. We have to hedge our bets. And we need to recognise that there are going to be a number of forces, structures, processes, and so on that will shape the innovation activity that occurs. So if you have a very strong risk environment, such as, say, in Brazil, where individual public servants are targeted, can be targeted by the auditors to the extent they have to hire their own lawyers to defend them, that's a risk environment that's going to push innovation in certain directions. In Australia, we know there are certain features also that shape innovation. Our innovation facets model here that just breaks down different types of innovation, we've found it a useful conversation starter with different governments to think about what's shaping the innovation activity that's going on and why. And the third thing that we've seen that's needed is that there has to be some form of stewardship. Innovation, by necessity, pulls things in different directions because it's about doing something new to the context. But that has a threat to the overall system coherence, compatibility, and interoperability. If you let 1,000 flowers bloom, there are costs to that. Someone has to monitor this. Someone has to see the system as a whole and see how it's functioning. We can't just let everything go on. Doesn't mean anyone has to control that or can control that, but someone's got to be actually able to see what's working and what's not and draw the lessons from that. Someone has to have that care and appreciation of the collective whole. We generally, though, haven't seen that because government hasn't needed that in the innovation space. In the past, innovation has sufficed. We've made do. There's been enough people who are willing to bear the costs of pushing themselves up against the system. But now, in the world we're in, change is too fast, too rapid, too great. We need innovation to be more systemic. I think what we're also seeing is some emerging cases from different parts of the world that point to what a future government, well, the future of government could look like. Basically, different examples of where governments are doing things that can help reduce the transaction and friction costs of dealing with change, where they aren't so locked into the busy work and traditional structures of government, but are pointing to, well, how do we build something that's a bit more dynamic? I'm using the word dexterous here a bit snidely, but it's more than agility. It's about how can we build a system that can engage with change on an ongoing basis rather than be forced to react to it. So the Better Rules, Better Outcomes project, I think, is a fantastic example of where it points to, you know, if we can stop law being the sticking point in so much of what government does, that opens up huge potential. In the UK, their Open Innovation team acts as a broker between the academic sector and the public sector, providing a much better way, a much better piece of collaboration infrastructure for helping tap into expertise and knowledge. Canada's Talent Cloud project is looking at, well, how does the gig economy model sort of work for the public service? What could happen if you could access talent based on need rather than who's in which team, and can you borrow them from there? And the London Office of Technology and Innovation, I think, is another interesting example where they're deliberately looking at what are the different types of collaborations you can have and pointing to the potential for a collaboration hierarchy. so that you can... Collaboration is really hard when you're trying to get different parts of government to work together in new ways. That takes generally a lot of effort, a lot of personal connections. How do we strip some of that out so it's easier to do, so you can collaborate with people much easier? In terms of the Australian context, I mean, I can't speak with my official hat there because I've been a bit out of the loop. But I think, you know, I think there have been some major steps over the past decade. I think some things have become much more embedded. Practice of design, agile and user experience and so on has clearly become much more mainstreamed. I think perhaps we all underestimated the extent to which fragmentation would occur, and that the difficulty that brings from a political and public service perspective. But the interesting thing about doing this work at the observatory is we get to see a lot of different countries in depth, and everyone you can see is learning. No one has mastered this, even the Nordics. We're all trying to do better in this space, and I think there are pieces that we can see from around the world. It's just a matter of how can we connect them together to make them into a functional whole. Anyway, that's just a quick spiel.
Thank you very much. And I want to just quickly go back to this model. I have seen many innovation models around the world, and often very expensive ones. And but this was particularly clever for us in an applied way in the governments that I've worked in, because because basically the top is top down and the bottom is bottom up. To the right is anticipatory, and to the left is so forward-looking or backward-looking, normative or formative. It's really interesting to realise that a lot of innovation stuff ends up becoming either directed improvements or bottom-up improvements, but there's very little in the directed or bottom-up formative. Where are we going next and how do we get there? It was just really, and it's not to say that one is better than the other, but the idea that you have all four and that you're trying to end up with more bottom-up innovation across the whole system so that it can actually scale. This gave us a really useful model for shaping our work program in several of the governments I've been in over the last, since it came out, so thank you for that. We were going to have someone to talk about emerging tech in government. Unfortunately, our speaker couldn't come, we were hoping to get a particular person, but what I thought I'd do is just spend just a couple of minutes on three things that I think are helpful for this discussion, and then we'll jump into the bar camp discussion, which is far more interesting. You know, we could talk about tech, we can talk about blockchain, we can talk about all kinds of emerging fun stuff, but the three things that I've seen emerging that I think are most interesting for a public sector reform perspective are, first of all, the acknowledgement that public sectors are different than government, and that new public management, whilst brought some benefits, has also brought some disadvantages that we need to work through. This isn't just me saying this, there is so many articles and such that are starting to pop up around this, and it's been quite interesting to see a bit of a renaissance in people saying, or at least the start of a renaissance perhaps, around people starting to say, well, hold on a second, governments are different from public, you know, from private sector, and a bit special, and we need to rethink some of that. For those interested in a little bit more about that, or who don't know what new public management is, we'll have an interesting article on Monday or Tuesday, won't we, about that in TheMandarin. The second thing is incentive systems, the realisation that pure economic incentive systems are possibly not getting the absolute best human outcomes all the time. So, for those coming in remotely or watching the stream later, there's a lot of amusing comments from around the room about, you know, who knew that maybe life wasn't just about money, or, you know, banks telling us what to do. So, but what's been interesting is the applied approach to this. So in New Zealand, of course, is the wellness framework, which was many years, a decade in the making, but they applied it. They now have a wellness budget, and they have a living standards framework. And if you actually are asking for money for a program, if you're asking for money for a new policy proposal, and you have to not just say the economics, but you have to say here's the value it's going to have for economic, social, human and environmental capitals, that creates the possibility that maybe you spend a little bit more but get a better outcome. Whereas quite often we're under so much pressure to just take the cheapest, because cheap is considered value for money, and it's not necessarily reflecting or addressing those other values. So in New South Wales, I was delighted to see the Human Service Outcomes Framework ironically created as a means of determining the return on investment for social services. But it was created as a way to, it has 7 areas of metrics that are all around quality of life measures. And they use that to say, well, how do we, where do we prioritise funding around social service investment? And of course, we got into looking at digital government, and we said, well, why don't we just turn that entire framework back on all government services? Surely we should be measuring the quality of life impact of everything that we do, which was an interesting and welcome conversation to have, which was quite cool. And the third thing I thought I'd quickly raise relevant to us is futures, exploring futures. I think there's a lot of what do we do in the next 5 years, and of course you end up the status quo on speed usually, or the latest trend that people have tuned into, taken to the nth degree but nothing else necessarily. And there has been more and more movement around, well, what do we want to work towards? What do we need to transform towards? So there's certainly some work from New Zealand and New South Wales and other places around optimistic futures and designing a 50-year good, or what your life should look like, and then reverse engineering what your strategy should be. But I'm seeing more and more of that happening as well, where people are saying, well, we can't just run away from stuff, we have to move towards something. So we need to design that something, and that something needs to be probably values-based. Which brings us full circle back to people starting to rethink new public management and starting to think about things like public values management. So that's my short bar camp. So we're going to start from here. Now, you're going to run the bar camp session, aren't you?
Sure.
You and Alison, and Ruth's not here, so yes. You're okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, I'm handing over to the amazing Gavin Tapp, and you already know Alison, so thank you. Do you need anything on this?
I don't need that. So we're going to stream the first couple. I'm just going to recap things you've said already.
Yep.
So we're going to stream the first couple. At some point, we're going to reach a point where we are going to stop streaming, and we'll announce that on the stream. Who's been to an Unconference or a bar camp before? Some of you, okay. We're relying on you to coach the others. So the quick version of this for the newcomers is often a bar camp or an Unconference will run for the whole day. And sometimes they're set up with a theme or a topic, sometimes they're not. The idea is that the group of people who come together create their own conference. And the way they do that is by starting with a board like this. Sometimes there's more than one track. We have one track here. People can say, I want to talk about rocket launches. I want to talk about cats and dogs. And we don't kind of put too many limits on what you can talk about. Normally you can vote with your feet if there's different streams. If the room you're in turns out to be not so interesting, you can move to the other room. And I think if you are if you're standing here giving a talk in a minute and people start to go and have a cup of coffee, don't take it personally. Just engage more with the people that are here because they're really interested in what you're saying. And if people want to go outside and chat, often the best conversations at events like this are over coffee outside. So we're all still at the same conference. We're all having a good time. We're all here to discuss broadly the same kind of stuff because that's the title of this conference. What else can I tell you? If you've got a new book you want to sell more copies of, please don't mention it here. I mean, that's great. Congratulations. It's hard to publish a book. I think if you were starting to sell something that you were going to get money for, you might get a bit of quiet tut-tutting from me initially, then tut-tutting from the room, and then people would start to leave. And if people start to leave, I might say, hey, if you can't bring this back to something kind of relevant, we might ask you to bring it back to something relevant or give the floor to someone else. So I'm just going to put that out there. It doesn't really ever happen, but just in case you've been warned. What else can I tell you? It's a while since I've run one of these. We used to do them more often. Craig, what am I forgetting?
I think that's everything, because we're already ready to go. So.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't want to take up too much more time. So, number one on the schedule, would you like to come up and take charge? Who is it?
Oh, that's me.
Or have you just done yours?
So the only reason I'm up here for this one is because I had to drag this man up. So what we thought might be useful to talk about is something that's emerged over the last 10 years is Comsification of public sectors and the impact of that. So we thought we'd have a chat. So come in. You're a much taller man. They're a taller person. Rather, it'll be fun.
Endlessly comical.
Before you get going, do you want to just put this back to the sponsors?
Oh, yeah, good point.
Or we can turn it off either way.
I can put it back in the sponsor slide. That's a kind of a nice thing to do. Dun, dun, dun. So, James,
Yes, Pia.
if we are to consider what benefit do comms teams bring to public sectors?
Wow, how long have we got? We were discussing this before, and you're about to publish something that's sort of talking about some of the negative side of this, and I instantly sort of went, well, wait a minute, I work in a comms team, and we do some good stuff. I think, like at any of these issues, it's a spectrum, and there are horrible examples of government comms that I think you're going to talk about that are saccharine and covering up horrible performance from government agencies and keeping that from the public, which is a terrible thing. But I've got plenty of examples of journalists just making those horrific sort of beat up stories about people in government agencies doing good, solid work that should be done. And they've found an avenue to attack that and exploit that. And it's difficult to, I find it difficult to have an opinion because I think it's a shifting scale. And yeah, as I say, there are excesses on both sides of that.
And one of the challenges, I think, is that people feel this need to use almost market speak, market language, and lots of uses of the words like, I don't know.
Yeah.
We all know the buzzwords, and so you end up with buzzword-filled communications. Is that the comms teams, or is that something else?
I think that's government service culture.
Yeah.
It's the bloody IT help desk, isn't it? And where is it, the IT help desk? That's what it is, but it's never called, because it's this vision of like, oh no, we're beyond that, and we're this service, it's lovely that you want to be that way, but is that actually useful to the people who need to? For the person who's coming to your organisation for the first day, and they need to, get access to something, and they're looking on your intranet site, which is undoubtedly full of like a million different links, and it's all over the place, and they've decided to call the IT help desk something completely generic that doesn't, service, I don't know, any of those words that come up. So it is. Is it chicken and egg? I don't know. Is that coming from comms? Or is it just, again, public service navel gazing?
Yeah.
And that comms then is a catalyst to make much worse?
I had a friend of mine in a comms team in another government in another country. We had a debate about this, and she said that they try to use straight English, and quite often it'll be the senior executives that she's working with that say, well, hold on, where's the word, synergy, and where's, and so you end up with these executive summaries that mean nothing. In fact, you could put two executive summaries of two different departments or programs side by side, and neither of them mean anything.
I'm working for corrective services at the moment, and they're...
It's being live streamed.
Yeah.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Okay.
In some state, possibly in Australia, and they refer to them as correctional facilities or correctional centres. They're not prisons or jails, and I understand the reasoning why, because they're genuinely trying to make these people who are in these situations better people and to reintegrate into society, and just calling it a jail or a prison doesn't actually emphasise that. But if someone's coming to our website and a member of their family is in jail and they maybe don't have the same educational background and insight that we might have, and they're looking for how to find where the jail is, do they even know would they even register what a correctional facility? Oh, I've got to do, on a website. So it's, are there easy answers to these questions?
Let alone the Australian spelling, right? I'm sure there'd be people...
Spelling's not my my thing.
So language matters, and language also sets context and sets
absolutely.
Expectations and those kind of things. I think one of the other challenges then that I have is the notion of comms teams becoming the single means of engaging with the public. And I think that's where it's possibly gone a little far, because there is a difference between official communications and unofficial communications. As a professional, I should be able to have a professional conversation about things for which I know. I have literally been told in the past, you're not allowed to speak about anything you know in government, but you're also not allowed to speak about anything you don't know. So, yeah, anything else is fine.
And I'll sure. And I'll say on the other side of that is that we regularly see, and for years I've seen parts of our organisation come to us in whatever organisation I'm in at the time, and they've got this new thing, this new widget they're doing, or this new thing they're doing, and they've written how they want their comms to work, and it's absolutely horrific and will mean nothing to anybody. And we naturally are going, please God, no, no. And we very typically will have a policy that you're the subject matter expert, we're the comms people. You tell us, we've written what we're going to say, what you're going to say. You tell us if any of it's factually incorrect. Because otherwise there is just horror show after horror show after horror show. But we're using those powers for good. And so that's all right, isn't it?
Yeah.
But quite frequently, and we're in a position where we're able to do that, but I see that other side where I think one department, and they had, for very, very basic comms, they had 12 layers of approval to get, which is where you get that horrific government speak, trying to talk about some simple issue to people who aren't au fait with that sort of stuff, with your particular brand of whatever government you're doing.
So we've got 2 minutes more. So just a couple of last quick points. So I think this is one of those topics again, which is there's a nuanced solution that we need to find, which is how do we best use comms for what comms are good at, but also enable broader communications that don't have to be through comms, because when you have to go through 12, let alone 2 layers of approval to do a tweet, you can't do online conversations. You can't have, whether it's official or unofficial or just professional conversations. And the ability for public servants to be professionals in our own right in the community, there's 2 million of us across the country. It's insane, the idea that public servants can't engage as professionals, because the amount of knowledge and experience that you are missing out in the public domain when public servants are not allowed to engage online is a real problem.
And how do you have this one, or the instant desire for government is just to have this one-size-fits-all solution that says either you're never allowed to do it or you're always allowed to do it. And when the reality probably is you're probably allowed to do it sometimes. It's probably a good idea to do it sometimes, and it may not be for the really smart, really articulate people who understand their audience and what they're talking about. That's great, but there are many different sorts of public servants out there, and we're all would tend to be from a similar sort of demographic, whereas there are agencies like police and who have lots of different sorts of public servants sort of working in them, and whether they need more controls about what they're doing, because they're dealing with highly sensitive topics that they don't necessarily understand all the nuance to.
Well, with our last 30 seconds, I guess the final point from me would be seeing engagement as a good thing as a starting point is probably helpful, and support services and comms as supporting people is probably a good start rather than controlling. Would probably be a good start. But
it'd be lovely, but it's just going to be.
We're going to work it through.
It's all going to come down to the individuals in those organisations and how switched on they are.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye.
Just over the note for me.
I think Tom is next. Do you want to head it up? I forgot to mention the most important thing, which is there's a timer here that you can see, so you'll get a window of about... Stop that. No. About 10 minutes. And I also have an Apple adapter, and I have an iPhone E-type adapter if you want to plug in that kind of device.
Do you have a web browser?
Pia, do we have a web browser? This is Pia's laptop. So, where's Pia? There she is. Yeah, I believe we do. Here, let me just take charge of her laptop. There you go. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Tom Worthington, a long time in the past former public servant, and now a wannabe academic at the Australian National University. I've got what I hope will be a partial solution to the question just asked. how can public servants talk about these things? And now I can't find the link I want. There's, that one will do. So the question is, you're a public servant, how can you go and discuss these sorts of topics? One way I suggest, and which I did in the past, admittedly it was a long time in the past, is you put on another hat. So you join a committee of your profession. I'm a computer programmer by background, so I belong to computing organisations. Or you become a student of some sort or another, and that's a way in which you take off your public servant hat and you put on a different hat, and you can have a more free discussion on what needs to be done and how to go about doing it. This example's come up in the last week. The Department of Foreign Affairs wanted someone to run cyber boot camps for government officials around the Asia Pacific, and ANU won the contract. So they're going to be running courses, in inverted commas, for bureaucrats from government agencies. Other universities do the same sort of thing. What happens is a group of public servants get into a room. It's either all off the record, or you invoke the Chatham House rule where you can say what was said but not who said it. And then you can have a discussion of, you know, oh, it's like that in your agency, it's like that in your department, it's like that in my department. What could we ever do about it? You get together and work out what to do. Then afterwards, you go back to your agency, you put on your agency hat, and you implement your bit of what you think should be done, and informally keep in touch with your colleagues from other agencies or governments, essentially. And you feel empowered because you've learned how to do this, you've got an idea of what to do. So that was my little suggestion of how to do this. I used to do this in a relatively privileged position since my agency gave me official approval to run for an office in my professional body. And they understood that when I went to Parliament House to answer questions at a Senate committee, I had my other hat on, and even the senators understood that. Maybe it's a little more difficult with more close scrutiny with the internet. You've always got to worry, has someone got the recorder turned on in the room, will they respect the conventions of not saying who said what or not saying what was said? But I'd suggest we could do a little more of that sort of thing around the place. That was about all I had to say. Can I ask for questions?
Yeah.
Questions?
You don't have to use the whole 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yes?
You said wear another hat. The interpretation of a public servant at all times is we're not allowed to have other hats.
If you can repeat the question for the stream.
Okay, the comment was wear another hat, but the interpretation is a public servant is wearing their public servant hat at all times. But if your agency has sent you to a educational institution to learn about being a public servant, you can have your public servant hat on, but have it in a relaxed style on the back of your head. You are officially endorsed to be a little freer because you're there to learn things. Obviously, if you spend the whole time there rubbishing your minister or your government policies, that may well get back, and so you have to, you know, be a little careful of what you do. Spare a thought for public servants from some other countries who, when they get back, might well be put in jail or worse if they say the wrong thing. But in general, these confidences can be respected. And so, yeah, you've got to, within reason. And also you may well have tacit support for what you do unless you do the wrong thing and get caught. Yeah, you've got to be careful. The question down the back of the room.
So I'm just looking at the website now, and it seems to me Cyber Boot Camp is primarily about cyber security for public servants.
Okay, Cyber Boot Camp is primarily about cyber security within the government for public servants. Exactly what it is, I think, is still being worked out. I think in the way this is answering the issue of threats to government. When an educational institution gets a brief like this, they then have some scope to interpret what they mean by it. But once you get the group of public servants in the room and you close the door and you understand the rules, then you can have the discussion you want to have around the issues. I just brought this one example up because it was recent. But
yeah, and I only asked because I
yeah.
think that it's a great model for potentially, data management, or, there are a number of technologically related subject matters which, bureaucracy could do better at.
Yes, there are other technological matters the government could do better at, and there are lots of committees. So there are standards committees, agency committee, all sorts of ones. So I'm on the Australian Computer Society Blockchain Committee, for example, which gets government all excited. And we have public servants and technical people and researchers and all sorts. Was that another hand?
Yeah, it sort of was. So I agree that this is a really good way to get public servants talking, and I think the other thing that happens is working groups. And if anybody ever wants to know in the data space about the Science Agency Data Working Group, let me know, because that was fun. But the trick to that...
Let me just repeat that. The Science Agency's Data Working Group has been recommended as one of these sorts of things.
The thing is, though, and the trick to that one, and to many of these, you have to know it exists before you can participate. And many of them are pitched to the level above practitioner.
Okay, so
Things I would love to hear your thoughts on solutions to both of these.
So the catch with these sorts of things is you need to know the committee exists, and it may be at too high a level to actually discuss the details you want to discuss. So there you might form a high-level one. So I used to be on an interdepartmental committee on electronic document management, and we were at the more technical level, and then there was another committee with more senior people on it, which was essentially there to endorse what we were doing, and when we prepared a report to then go and stand up in public and take credit for it, in effect. So the other aspect of this is the frustration may be that you, as a public servant, you may do all the work and never get any of the credit for it, but that's not what you're there to do. It'll be a report of your committee or a higher level committee. I once wrote my name into the Electronic Document Management Committee appendix example as an example of metadata, just so I could prove I had something to do with it. But that was a bit naughty, really. So what was the name of that committee again? Science Agency Data Working Group. Perhaps in general, if you look for working groups and agencies, you'll probably find a lot of these. Okay. 30 seconds left. One more hand at the back.
We had one meeting of One Team Gov, which is a global organisation here in Canberra, and one of the things that came up was these kind of plethora of networks out there, and I think that was one of the things, as one of our actions, is to actually kind of identify where all those networks were and start to connect them. So I think maybe...
Okay, so One Team Gov, if we do a search, will we find that?
Yeah.
One Team Gov is looking at some of these sorts of things. Thank you very much.
Did you want to show anything?
No,
Not sure.
no. So I'm getting.
I'm assisting.
Yeah, he's my MC. So if you don't understand anything, he's supposed to ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm a former semantic web researcher at SARO, now at the ABS, and my day job is building knowledge graph. And my talk is about that, but it's prompted by a guy which is in my research community, which is also a firefighter. And what he's explaining, and there's a video, I've tweeted it today, Laurent Lefort, you can have a look later. And it's really exciting because he's explaining he's now using a knowledge graph to bring all the data he needs in his role as a firefighter. And it's compelling, totally compelling. But the good idea is that it's the maximum value of the data where it's integrated and answering a particular user need. And it's also local. And what strikes me in Australia, we've been trying to do data integration from the top, sort of a whole of government data integration, whereas we haven't really tried to do local user-focused, smaller scale, but higher value data integration. And so my question is, do we need a data exchange for this type of things, for exchanging data over digital twins, exchanging data for a firefighter? And we have lots of firefighters which may, these days, needs the best data they can get. So that's my question. And the answer is, now I take back my tech hat. Yes, there are starting to be solutions, and there are starting to be data exchange happening, mainly in the sphere of Wikidata, Wikipedia, and particular format where everything comes together. But it's still done by research team or by people working for this non-for-profit organization. What I'm thinking is missing is the toolbox and also the social pressure for this thing to happen. And I think it was a good place to push this through. So that's my only thing. You can ask all the questions you want.
Yeah. I think we just talked about that. You know, what was that Bedford's law about, you know, an organization and its systems matching structure? That, you know, this is a challenge that suddenly machine learning, you know, in something like Google, oh, we'll get all the data. Facebook, we'll get all the data from everywhere. The public service isn't set up like that. That, you know, the need to know, and there's always been these silos, and suddenly it's like, well, need to know is now a computer could go out and do that. You're taking this unstructured data and you're trying to structure it. What are the social and organizational processes that we use to get there? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, something like this, where you're looking at a whole city, you know, there's of course privacy concerns, but there's also a huge impact that firefighters need to know where things are. And
yeah, so I should probably say a bit more about the technology underneath, which is basically you put everything together. You put the data, you put whatever explains the data together with the data. So the semantic web has allowed that, but it's also the human behind the semantic web which are indeed bringing this data, because sometimes the data which explains the data is buried somewhere in a place nobody understands anymore. So it's not so much a technical issue, the technical issue, there are people doing it. It's more a social issue of having this urge to put all the data together. And if we're thinking about the firefighter and the value all the data has for this firefighter, and if we port it into other domain, I think that's the motivation we need to share, and I wanted to share today. And we can go for question, maybe? Sure.
So I cannot turn that around. Specifically, with respect to the bushfires that we've had recently, do we have the facility on Google Maps or whatever to know exactly where the rural firefighters are deployed in real time? Because as far as I know, when I'm listening to the radio, the reports of where fires are maybe 2 hours ago or something, and they just get correlated by some sort of central agency or something.
Yep.
There doesn't seem to be any real-time data about
so the question was, do we know where firefighters and indeed fires are? I do have the answer, but
I can actually answer the question, and the answer is yes and no. Quite often we don't want firefighters. Yeah, I probably should have the mic.
You can give me an answer.
That's a question that has consequences. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Good. This was my obsession for about a decade, so I won't name the agency because I don't work there anymore. But the fact is, where the firefighters aren't necessarily where the main point of the fire is, because they will die. End of story. We tend to deploy firefighters around houses where might soon be impacted. We don't want firefighters in front of a fire front if we can help it. But in terms of finding that level of detail, we have data standards, we have interoperability standards, we have metadata standards. But who's downloaded data from some government website any time in the last few weeks even, and then found it doesn't have any metadata attached to it and you have to go to a website? You know, that's the actual act of doing it is not something that's happening on a regular, consistent basis. The other thing is we have a big privacy issue, And I can tell you that there's a household level database out there that tells you what the structure of a house is. We know it's a brick house, we know it's a wood house. Now, firefighters, your immediate thought is, yes, we need that information. What I last heard when I was actually involved is that there is, in fact, a project underway. I believe the Australian government solicitor was commissioned to do this, is to actually find out the confidentiality of an address, the privacy details of an address. Is an address private? Can we have a database that has a list of all of the houses and says this is a brick house, this is a wooden house? And I hadn't heard the results of that because I no longer work at that agency. But, you know, the issues are legal, and if they're not legal, they're perceived to be legal, they're perceived to be privacy, and they are the interoperability of the data. And it's state-based as well, so we can have an idea. Oh, there we go, hotspots.
Yes, there's a new version, but this one loads faster.
But this is based on satellite data, so you're highly dependent on the paths of one of the satellites to be able to get, and that can be hours apart in sometimes. Sometimes they're only 20 minutes apart, sometimes they can be hours apart. The data that the RFS releases is done by line scan data, where they have an aircraft that goes up and actually takes basically heat-sensitive infrared photos of the fire, so they know where it is right now. And they do that on a regular basis, as they do, like right now. They're doing that basically constantly.
Yes, so this new version is part of the Digital Earth Australia program, which actually has some budget funding, which is great. And it is an amazing, like, I know we talked, you know, things getting better and getting worse. It's amazing that you can now get this data for free. Everyone can get it. It's there.
Hotspots is 15 years old.
Yeah, but the Digital Earth program, that was always there, that GA and Landgate could work that out. But you can do this yourself now through cloud computing. If you wanted to do your own hotspot, you can get the satellite feeds, you know, sometime after they get downlinked. There's lots of big data there, but it's nice that it's there.
Yeah, just a point I wanted to add is that we need to do data exchange at a lower scale, at a micro scale, as needs be, because something which is private and needs to be protected in some circumstances probably shouldn't in other circumstances. And if it's locally managed, more decentralized, the decision of sharing or not sharing will be made the right way.
Yeah.
And that's
why the lawyers got involved.
Am I?
You've got 30 seconds. I'm just going to check Slido because we had a couple of questions come in earlier. I'm just going to see if any have come in about this. And I just want to mention, we're looking at Slido just in case you're wondering if we ignored your last questions. It's just they got answered from a question in the room.
So there was a question, I think it was about Pia's digital twin article being under a paywall. I'll just call that out. But yes, there is a New South Wales digital twin project that you can find outside the paywall.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I invite our next speaker to come up, please? Fiona. Hi, Fiona. How are you? Welcome back. Hello. Do you need slides or screens or anything? Okay, no worries.
Maybe we can close this tab.
Let me just put it back on the sponsor one and then you can
Yeah.
go on. Just get started while I'm fiddling with this.
Righto. We're here to sing a slightly new variation of an old song called If You Want Stuff Done, You're Going to Have to Pay For It. So Fiona and I, as well as several other people in this room, were involved with setting up Open Knowledge Australia. In fact, we were co-chairs of the board, and we kind of made, with a few other people,
Open Knowledge in the room. Hi, James. Hi, Nick.
Hello, folk. Not just Open Knowledge Australia, but we kind of made Melbourne happen, with including other people in the room. Hello, yes, we're all in this boat together. And the way we did it is in our own volunteer time. And that was great, and it was wonderful, and we got amazing things done. You ran the first GovHack.
In Melbourne.
In Melbourne, yep. And based on the conversation that we had in a hallway, I decided to start Health Hack, and 3 months later I hadn't slept. And it's still running, like it's a national event. It's amazing. In fact, hello.
We have, yes, veterans of GovHack and Health Hack here today.
Right. Last week's, I believe, winners of GovHack, who've now, who participated in Health Hack, I think in the second one, and have now gone on to found a data startup. Yay.
So when we was kicking off Open Knowledge Australia, Pia talked a lot about the metaphor of an upside down umbrella, that what we really wanted to be able to do was to be able to kind of scoop up all of the awesome things that were happening in the community, because one of the really exciting thing that came out of that period of time around the Gov2 Task Force and the start of GovHack, and I'm sure it's still happening, I'm just a little bit out of the loop now, was there is an incredible energy. And, as we heard earlier today, cool stuff comes out of corridor conversations and conversations in the pub. And we wanted to be able to connect and amplify that energy and awesomeness that was going on.
And it took a lot of little things and a lot of small stuff that could move fast and make changes quickly. And the reason we could do that was because we had energy and enthusiasm, and somebody kind of going, yeah, sure, you want to do it, do it. Yeah, why not? Here, have an extra label, have an extra logo, go for it. But more than that, we had an underlying structure that let us do that both legally and financially, which meant that we could just make events happen and call people up and go, hey, can you give us a room for a weekend? And they did, because we could actually process donations and we could make all that stuff happen, and that was incredibly valuable.
So that admin support and having a bank account in particular made an enormous amount of difference to our ability to do things. And I think the work that LCA do in auspicing lots and lots of little events and providing that infrastructure of banks and insurance and things which give sponsors a little bit of confidence that you are legit is an incredibly important service that they provide.
Yep. So Linux Australia, all sorts of organisations do some variation on this at a very small level. What they don't do is really pay the people who make it happen. And I don't know about anyone else, but running Health Hack was a second full-time job for me. Who else has been involved in a volunteer organisation for whom that was a full-time job? Hey.
Hi.
Yeah. Hello, 70% of this room, yes. And, it killed me. And eventually...
Yeah, so volunteer burnout is a real thing, and yes, I'm seeing you nodding in the room because it's true, and it's I think a tragedy of this space that this energy and enthusiasm and willpower eventually people run out of it because it's hard and it's tiring.
And Open Knowledge eventually folded because all of us who got involved at around the same time burnt out at about the same time, and now it's no longer happening, which is a real shame, because the legal structures are still kind of there and we could make it happen. And if we actually paid people to do this, I reckon it could happen again. Which is kind of the moral of the story. If you want this to happen, you're going to have to pay for it. Right, yes, hi. Yeah, everyone's nodding. I know we know this. The point is, if we don't make this happen at that micro-governance level, we can't make it happen properly at a macro-governance level, because we can't move and shift and innovate quickly enough to make new stuff come in. And we end up with the same old arguments and the same stuff happening again. And we don't end up with cool GovHack t-shirts, and that would be very sad. Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, okay, some of the...
Microphone.
Thanks, Alison.
Well done, first of all, for actually setting these things up. The thing is, what was the value, did you receive value from people who are participating, and where the outputs, where the outputs of your events?
Absolutely, but my rent doesn't pay in public exposure.
I would say that it has made a difference to the career opportunities I have had. I'm not sure if that was your question.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, were there quite a few volunteers that you were having to? Yes, and then have they then moved on to more positions?
Look, yes, we
Other
all got...
places where they can activate what they were doing.
Absolutely, we all got value out of it, and as Fiona said, we've all had different kinds of career opportunities and interesting capabilities and fantastic networks, and here we are. It didn't affect the fact that I was putting in 40 hours a week, and
it meant that eventually when, we all did kind of, the core group of Melbourne organisers that I'm thinking about became kind of exhausted, that the group did fold. That, for a while we did have a kind of a succession plan, and we had some new folks come in and keep it going for a while. But yeah, it wasn't able to keep going in the same way as the original core stepped away for reasons. Sorry, Lachlan.
I was just going to add a little bit about how the beauty of something like OpenGov or GovHack is that it's, without wanting to dive too deep, largely politically neutral compared to something like other groups that I've been involved with, which were passion projects and not politically neutral or not able to be politically neutral, like Digital Rights Watch or Electronic Frontiers. One of the Electronic Frontiers board members recently wrote a blog post about how he spends almost a day a month doing work. He's a father of a young child. He has his own business as well, and he's still spending a day a month doing work for the EFA, and that's in a board of 8 people who are largely doing that. It's expensive, but the EFA will never get government funding because of the nature of the criticism that they level at the government, whereas something like OpenGov or GovHack can get government funding with a little bit more ease, I guess, and it's worth jumping on those opportunities when they present themselves to us.
Right, and one of the ways in which things like GovHack has been used, and conversely, it's sort of been moved around to be auspiced under different kinds of organisations. And one of the things it's done is given organisations a bit of a boost and given them a bit of money and a bit of capacity to move around and a little bit of flexibility. And that works both ways. And we still have several organisations that can do this. I reckon personally, Open Australia totally cornered the market on the right name for that kind of organisation, and we should go to them and see if we can use their name and someone else's infrastructure. Yes, hello, lots of nodding around the room.
So Craig.
Okay, a comment and a question. So first, my comment is I actually have an opposing view on that. I actually think that if you're not politically aligned in Australia, you actually have less propensity to get funding.
Excellent. Let's take that to the pub.
Because there aren't people with a particular axe to grind who want to put money
9
into
seconds,
you.
Craig.
So it gets quite hard. The question is, can you look at some of these initiatives as job creation programs and try and get them funded through that mechanism?
Well, seeing as the time has gone off,
Maybe.
Yes, again, let's take that to the pub. Complicated answer.
Thank you. Next is Nicholas, I think? Nicholas, G.
I sort of put it there. I'm happy to talk, but I put myself down since when there were 2 people, and I think I think more other people should come before.
You have a story to finish telling.
Do you want to spend a minute finishing that story that I cut you off?
No.
Okay. If you're sure. Okay.
We move on.
Next is it Ashka?
I'll tell you one thing.
Well, come on. You're right or you're off. I mean, because no one can hear you. Hold on.
The stream can't hear you.
Just come and stand over here. That one's off. Just do it.
I shouldn't have said this. So Greg Jericho, I follow him on Twitter, and he didn't know that this isn't a tweet that is that he knew was relevant to today, but he's just tweeted the leaders, the top 3 tennis players 10 years ago were Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic, and Roger Federer. And the top 3 tennis players today are Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic. Thank you.
So nothing has changed. Did you want to come up? Do you need a plug-in or anything? No, that's good. You good? Okay. Kristin, right in the middle here, and the mic's looking up.
Yep, cool. Hi everyone, this is Asghar Qazi, and I'm a business analyst in the New South Wales government. I'll just start off with the usual disclaimer that this I'm just talking from my personal experience and in my own personal capacity, and obviously not being representative of the government. So I'll just talk a bit about the work that I've been involved in over the past couple of months. About 8 to 10 months. It's a project started off by Pia, which called Rules as Code or Legislation as Code. It goes by a number of names. And what we've sort of gone through the process of understanding, like it's been an experimental kind of journey for us as well. So we've sort of found that rules are everywhere and rules are complicated. And in the course of day-to-day interactions with the government, citizens generally comply with or try to comply with a lot of rules. And you've got, on the other hand, you've got government agencies who've got to enforce some of those rules. Some of the regulators have got to enforce some of the rules. So you often end up in a situation where you've got those two sides, and often, because the rules are so much and because they are so complex, it's sort of difficult to understand whether the rules are being complied with and being enforced in the way that they've been described in legislation or in policy documents or in operational procedures. So we've worked with two agencies to understand some of their rules, and we've sort of gone down the pathway of coding some of those rules and making them openly available. So a reference authoritative implementation of the rules that's openly available so that they can be consumed through an API, and they are machine consumable. So what that does is basically it sort of opens up a lot of opportunities for a lot of people to build stuff related to those rules and by consuming those rules. So that can be in service delivery as well. For instance, if you've got somebody who wants to know whether they're eligible for a particular rebate or not, how do they know that? And whether there's an NGO or whether there's somebody else who can help them with that, then they can sort of consume those rules through that API and go through the process of making the citizen understand that, whether you're complying by the specifics of the rebate or the policy. So for one of the challenges, and I'll talk a bit about this, we faced is a lot of people in government don't understand, it's still, I guess, too early in terms of the rules as code process or the approach in Australia, that they find it either a difficult concept to grasp, or they are faced with the aspect that they so essentially they don't know which particular rules that they're enforcing or whether they're being complied with. So one of the things we suggested to some of our partner agencies was whether, if it's possible from a risk management perspective, because they had visibility of some of the things and whether some of the things were being complied with in terms of the rules, but they didn't have full visibility of it at a granular level. So if you've got a law and if you've got some rules and operational policies related to it, then are the processes in place to ensure that the law is being complied with? And so if you want to sort of, this is one of the approaches that we found has been a bit successful, has been if we are able to pitch it to them in a way that if you code your rules and make them openly available, then you not only can understand the complexity of it or how difficult they are to, to manage, but and in that process make them simpler, but at the same time link them to each of the processes that your organization owns and that your organization enforces. So when that happens, then that's potentially a way to sort of make citizens compliant with the rules, government agencies, private organizations. So it's an approach that we're still continuing on, and it's something that we're still working on. Where we've got our code openly available, and we're sort of working to complete the first reference implementation in the next couple of months. So that will be up as well. So just wanted to talk a bit about rules as code, and if you've got any questions, happy to answer. Yeah.
And if you keep your questions, keep it quite brief if you can, because there's a few people and not much time.
Just want to know where the code's available.
Yeah, so it's on GitHub, available on GitHub. It's the OpenFisca NSW instance, and it's available on GitHub. It's still in process of being worked on, and it's still like a work in progress, so it's experimental at this point in time. But yes, we've got some of the rules available publicly. Yep, I can share a link as well. Yeah.
Did you find situations where there were differences between the rule as codified and the rule in use? And in particular, cases where the only people who were capable of interpreting the rule were the people who were applying it, because the rule on the face of it seemed to mean something different from what people were actually doing?
Yes, so we've got a number of situations where people just think that they've sort of called out the exact steps, whereas when you go to the actual law or actual steps that are documented, then they are not the same. So there is that conflict, and it's useful to find those conflicts, because that way you can sort of tell people that, you know, this is a potential conflict, because the nature of that piece of legislation has been that it is, because it's been amended so many times, you've got this sort of complexity added, layer of complexity added each time it's been amended. And so, and obviously it's got a lot of historic context as well as to why a particular law was framed in a particular way.
If you're very quick, you can do one more question.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, that is definitely an issue that we found, yeah.
Where is the line between getting a computer to blindly execute things and having a human make choices in a more complex issue?
Yeah, so I think
that's a great question to pick up after we finish this session.
Let's take that to the pub.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, such power. Your phone is here. Thank you. So who was next? Nathaniel.
User testing.
Come on down. I take it with the collection of post-it notes, you're not going to plug in a device.
Sorry, what?
You're not plugging in?
No.
Great.
No.
Excellent.
At most I want a whiteboard, but that's all right.
There's no whiteboard.
All right, so I've changed the title of my talk a few times. What I want to, it's going to be like a bit of a conversation with you, because I need some ideas. I want your feedback. But basically my bugbear is that in the past 10 years since Gov2O Taskforce, and probably over the past 15, maybe a little bit more years, user testing has become more commonplace in government, which is great. We use user testing often as a way to check a box and say that people have validated our decisions. Sorry, we're streaming this one. I forgot to put the asterisk. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I want this streamed. So my thing is, how do we actually loop back and provide some sort of accountability to the people that... So basically my thing is, it's going to be a bit over the place. We don't respect people's time, really. So for user testing, which is a very pointy end of the design process, we will choose a time, 45 minutes, half an hour. We will choose the incentive. We will choose where we want to meet them. We will choose the conversation we want to have with them. We will choose the artifact that we want to present them to validate. And then they'll come into our place of work, usually, for the allotted time. And then they will say, yes, this looks great, or no, this isn't going to work for me. We go, thank you for your time. We boot them out the door. There is no accountability back to them of what we did with their stories, with their feedback. And when you compare that one small voice against, you know, the oppressing weight of executive and of ministers in government, it gets squashed. If it doesn't fit with our narrative, it gets squashed. And I'd like to see something that kind of protects people's time and contributions, because it's one of the few opportunities that they have to engage with government. They can't lobby. You know, individuals can't lobby government. They don't have millions to you know, legally and ethically lobby government ministers have their voice heard and their needs heard. How do we? I was thinking something like so you have privacy statements on websites. You might have a ethics statement or a corporate social responsibility statement. Is there something we could do to say, this is what this service did? These are things we heard from people. These are the ways that we took that feedback on board. We heard your stories, and these are all the ways in which we ignored you. I mean, so I just want to hear from the room. Like, what are your ideas of how we can protect the voices of individuals? I've got a question or contribution here.
So I'll just do a quick one. So I've always made it a policy that we, in the teams that I run at least, that we publish the outcomes of the research that we do, so that when we talk to someone to do user testing or user research, more broadly rather than just validation, that we publish the outcomes of that, and that's the commitment we make to them when we engage. But the second thing is we need to not, obviously, exactly to your point, to not just engage in user testing or user validation or even user research, which is often just validation, but shared design. So we started engaging in some actually Māori and Aboriginal design methodologies around shared approaches, what turned out to be true co-design, and that started to get quite a different outcome. Which requires a different input because you need to be willing for your perspective to change. But that was profound and quite amazing and led to unexpected outcomes.
So before we move on, Alison, how did you publish? Like published externally?
Yes.
Wow.
Not everyone sees that as acceptable.
Exactly. But
Yes. No. Alex had a question. I think you had a question as well. Did you? No. Yeah. We're going back to...
Thank you. I guess echoing some of Pia's points, I think the distinction between testing and research is really important, and making sure that there is informed consent from the participant as they're going into the process of research. So making sure that they don't just understand the exact process they'll be doing in that room for 45 minutes, but the entire process as best as possible. You can lay that out so that they're not just giving consent for the activity, they're giving consent for the outputs that they'll give and how that feeds in. I think co-design's really important, but that really changes the nature of the activity from something that is quite prescriptive, like you have someone validating a thing, you have a fairly good idea that either will or will not be validated. The co-design conversation then opens the ability for the outcome to be something that no one expected, and that's really hard with the funding mechanisms in government that sort of are funding based on a result. That sort of requires a more fundamental change, which is really, really difficult. So, sorry, that's not an answer.
What do you think about the accountability of the people who facilitate those sessions to make a promise that they will follow through with that and won't just, because it has more power than one person sitting in a room, but still it could be easily snuffed out and be no trace of it ever having happened.
Well, I think that's in the consent that the participant is giving. Like, they have to be able to understand the process, and that requires effort on the part of the researcher to make that process clear, and that's really hard.
Right, one more question. We've got 30 seconds. Tweet length question, please.
Yeah, I thought that's what happened in social sciences research anyway, but do you think it's because we tried to ram all these things into government so quickly and we're learning lessons from the private sector where there isn't as much of that, public purpose training required?
Yeah, also I think in the private sector, people have a choice whether they're going to be a consumer or not, whereas in government, everyone's a consumer. And so, there is no choice here. So we should be more accountable to the people that we're involving in our research, that we are going to listen and that we are going to, trace back and back to the pub. That pub list is getting long. Books in for 4 hours.
Thanks.
Gavin.
I can't read the name on the next one, but please come on down.
Hello, I get to talk as a citizen and student today because I haven't been a public servant for a little bit. I guess what I really kind of want to talk about is I had this really interesting experience when I lived in America, and I went to this thing called a town hall, and I said, this is really, really cool. Then I came back to Australia, and I realised that we used to have things like that, but we don't anymore. And something that I guess is really concerning me, as I think has concerned a lot of us, not just current public servants or ex-public servants or citizens, is the loss of trust in our democratic system and the loss of trust in government. And I guess something I kind of want to put to the group, I want to put out there is something I see. We talk a lot today, we've spoken, we've heard people speak about how there is a certain demographic that are in Parliament or in public service. We've heard people talk about engaging and how we actually really need to talk to people. We have heard people talk about champions, and we know that we're actually all in this room right now because of a couple of key champions who I don't think if they were there, we'd probably have this. So for me, what really stands out is people, platforms, and champions. So is there a way, how do we get more engagement within the actual public sector and within citizens? How do we create platforms to enable citizens of different backgrounds to share their views? And can we use that as a driving mechanism to help our youth, and not just our youth, but all ages, see that there is that they could have there is some kind of capability of trust there, that their voices might get heard. I don't have any particular solutions for it, and I'm not in a position to be able to have a platform to implement those solutions. But I really do feel that the best way that we can kind of go forward and try to maybe decrease a bit of this increasing lack of trust is to really get out there and engage. And I don't know if we can have, maybe a town hall. I know that Susan Templeman, who's an MP in my area, does days where she goes out in the pub and has discussions with citizens. I'm not sure if that's the way to go. But for me, it's also, I guess, not so much just at the politician level, but really at the public service level as well. How do we, when we're making these decisions, reach out to people and, whether, as Nathaniel talked about that user testing, I don't know, citizen testing our ideas. That's about all I had to say if anyone wants to question or something.
That's an excellent question. In my time in one of the agencies, I was trying to encourage some connections between different disability networks in the federal government so that they could talk to each other and share just basically how do I use my trim with my screen reader, things like that. And I was trying to get a forum set up so that they could talk about those things and maybe with some public help get some feedback back. That didn't progress within the government, but I'm part of an organisation called Aussie Way. It's a not-for-profit. It's to help people with digital accessibility. And one of the things we did is we set up a forum, and it's called forums.aussieway.org. It's free. It's public. You can ask your questions. You can actually talk to people. It's slowly growing. We obviously need more people in the community to input to that. But we're actually connecting with different disability organisations so that they can be involved, so they can ask the questions, but then also accessibility practitioners can help with advice for those kinds of things as well. So there's ways out there that can then happen.
Hi, Glenn Archer. I used to run a GMO once upon a time. I guess in terms of your question, I'll just take a slight tangent to that. At Agemo, we ran a survey for 5 years through the last decade called the Use and Satisfaction of Services, Government Services, and that demonstrated the sort of confidence around satisfaction and trust in government ICT at around, typically above 80%. When DTO ran a survey in late 2015, the number came in at under 50%, and the AIIA ran one about 6 months later that came in at about 19%. That's in terms of trust. And the cause of that was, in large part, the failure of major ICT systems in government. We had the tax office offline 19 times or something. We had the census debacle. And I think what struck me at the time was, it reminded me of a comment from a secretary of a department in this town, she's still a secretary, that in order to earn the trust of people as technology providers, you need to get the basics right. You need to be able to deliver reliable technology. And until you get that, you don't earn the right to sort of start contributing to bigger policy issues. And I do worry that somehow within the sort of technology landscape within government, we've lost the ability to kind of get some of those basics right.
I suppose also speaking to that theme of getting basics right, at the beginning of the day, Pia referenced another report that came out about the same time, which was ahead of the game, which was the Public Sector Reform Report. And one of the recommendations I particularly remember from that was drawing more on the knowledge and the experience of frontline service delivery staff. And I think that that's an interface that we are not utilising effectively. And I think, the stories which we all see, going around on social media about how awful it is to deal with Centrelink, that's awful for people, but it must also be awful for the staff in the centres who are not able to, give good care to their customers. And so I think that making better use of the experiences and the knowledge that we have among frontline delivery staff in the public sector would make a big difference.
10 seconds, do you want to...
I've just got a quick addition to that on, we were talking before with Nat about librarians. Libraries are really rich.
Thank you very much. Come on down, our next winner.
Can I plug HDMI?
Let's find out.
I'm doing...
Oh, HDMI.
You've got that?
I've got that. Here. Oh, we can use yours. That's fine. Let's see if it works.
Signal. Signal, right. It's all right? Okay. Is that doing a presentation mode? Doesn't matter. Yeah, there we are. Press that button, Tim. Okay, Boomer, I thought I'd better bring a bit of... And in fact, it just fits in quite well with where we've just been because, I'm a boomer, I'm retired, I don't have to work for a living or anything like that. And I've given you everything in the system that you currently have. I've given you idealism, Vietnam War, getting out of the Vietnam War, banning the bomb, getting into the Iraq War, all of those types of things. And I want you to pay for my pension, okay? But I'm an idealist because I still think about openness. I really think an important thing that we must remember, and it's been touched on, is maintaining and doing whatever we can to uphold trust and confidence in government. If we can't trust this system, what can we trust? We're left only with the courts, I believe. So we must do what we can in relation to that. And it seems to me we all know what the keys to that are. It's openness and transparency. It's this responsibility and accountability, simplicity, explainability. And the last one I think that we keep missing is a feedback loop. We must build a feedback loop into everything so that we make sure that we're covering all of those types of things. But we have these things that have come in recently, such as national security and data privacy, and those things are always put up as, well, we can't quite be as open and as transparent as we once were, and we can't be as accountable or visible or anything like that, nor can anything be as simple. Yet I've never seen a really simple response to that is, let's introduce a little bit of risk-based analysis as to whether something is really a matter of national security, whether data privacy in this situation, what is the risk? That's my first point. My second point is, we've got to remember that the bulk of what government does is administration. It is business as usual. It is going on day in, day out. We have this other aspect, which is the politics and the policy. And as pity is not here anymore, but Mick Chisnell and I had an animated discussion about this, as to which part of the Venn diagram moves into which. I would certainly say the right-hand side in the last 20 years has moved way into the government administration side in a way that has made government administration much more risk averse, much less transparent, and it's made public servants a whole lot less fearless and frank. And I think we've got to get back to some of these key principles in order to get trust and confidence happening back in government. The final point I want to make is the feedback loop. And it probably wasn't so much a feature back when the Gov2 Taskforce did its thing, but it's the area of citizen engagement which I referred to earlier, and now in particular customer experience. I still don't see much of this happening in Australia, but other governments in the world are really doing a lot of work in trying to tap into all of those people. The frontline Centrelink staff would be a classic example, whereby if they were getting an immediate feedback through their system on how their last engagement with a customer went, it would change their attitude. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, I'm saying that would give them an incentive, it would give them feedback that's very important to their service delivery. I say this as a really simple thing. If you go into go through the immigration in Singapore, as I did the other day, you go through and there's a little machine with smiley faces there. So you press that, and I had a very short wait, and I went and did that really happy smiley face. And I just stopped and turned around and looked at the next person coming behind me who did the same thing, and I watched the officer on the desk who looked to see what that person did. And I thought, they are getting direct feedback. That's all I've got. Thank you.
We've got time for maybe one quick question, if you're happy to take a question.
Absolutely.
Maybe just call it out in the interest of speed. Make it quick. Make Ali run. Oh, sorry, it's me.
Two quick questions. 14 seconds.
So first of all, you said the red is going into the blue. The red circle is going into the blue circle in the last 20 years. So what factors sort of made that happen? And the second thing is that you mentioned that we want to have feedback at the front line. So I guess in light of Scott Morrison's recent pronouncement to sort of, focus on service delivery, do you think that will have an impact?
You'll have to answer that at the pub.
I'll answer that at the pub. Thank you.
Yeah, you can answer that over lunch.
I will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you need this card? No. Just right here. There you go.
Thanks. Right, let's just get that up there.
Right, let me just get out there for a moment. That was a project. Now, my name's Sean Rennie. I used to be a public servant. For the last couple of years, I've been doing my Masters in Digital Humanities and Public Culture at the ANU. That's the other bit. It's not the 3AI. We come at from the other side. One of the things I looked at for my Masters thesis was looking at the relationship between IT and curatorial in the GLAM sector. For those of you who don't know, galleries, libraries, archives, museums. What I think might be worth doing just quickly, and I titled my speech there something about lessons in the public sector, because a lot of the GLAM sector is in the public sector. So I'm just going to give you an example about why open source is really, really a critical thing that we must get right. There's this thing called the yellow milkmaid syndrome. And these are all various different images of the self-portrait by, and I've got to stop doing that, sorry, the self-portrait of Van Gogh by Van Gogh. Yeah, go away. And what's really interesting about that is you can see that there are lots of different versions of that. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted a full view that wasn't going to, hang on. No. I don't do presentations from this very often, and obviously I need to do so. Now, if you just go and search this particular image, and just bear with me for 5 seconds while I get this right, and we've been cut to 5 minutes. You may notice that some of these images are quite different. This one in particular, this is known as the yellow milkmaid problem. The actual real yellow milkmaid is there. It's the Rijksstudio. Now, one of the things that the Rijksstudio did that was really, really good was that they had some leadership and they went, actually, there's tens of thousands of this image that are wrong, and we, as the owners of this cultural heritage, want to make sure that it's right. So one of the things that they did was they said, okay, what if we made all of our images open source? Anyone can grab them, anyone can remix them, anyone can play with them. So what you can do is you can then get a photo like this one, or one like this one, because I've done this before, because I need it for a project, and you can literally start sticking them together, like so, as long as you've got the tools to do so. And the whole beauty of this, so this is from an original stereogram. And somewhere in here, I actually created an image that mixed the two together, which, anyway, you get the point. You can take any one of those images, use any image software that you like and manipulate them into an image together, and then you're entitled to resell them. In fact, it's been so successful that the Rijksstudio now has an award every year that the top European design houses bust a gut to win, so they can say, we have reused this material the best. So the next time you're trying to promote open source in your organisation and people say, oh, why do we want to do that? You say, because if we don't, the really shit version of our policy, the really shit version of what we have to say will be the one that the public gets hold of. And I'll call it quits at then. Any questions?
Too good.
And I figure you all want to get to lunch.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Okay, so I'll just, sorry. Should also say one of the things that happened back in the Gov2O days, which I will link in the slides, was the GLAM Wiki event from 12 years ago, 11 years ago, which was well ahead of its time. So, Kristin and I have been diligently looking at the content from today and the feedback online. We've identified 7 themes that we think are the most critical that keep coming through. But if something else comes up, that's fine. But and they are participatory governance, whole of system reform, leadership and culture change, trust and public institutions. Don't worry, you don't need to write these down. Institutional amnesia, collaboration and capability, particularly between public services, public servants, but across different sectors. And data came through a lot as well. So we've set up an action station out in the next room next door. So we're going to break for lunch now, and the live streaming will be finishing now, and will only be coming back on when we are reporting on the outcomes, which will start about 3:30, but maybe a little earlier, maybe 3:15. But for everyone in the room here, please grab something to eat, have the conversations. We'll be reconvening in the room over there. And what we'll be doing is giving you effectively a little nudge every 20 minutes. You can stay at the one action station for the entire time, or you can shift around, but we'll just be giving a little nudge every 20 minutes to encourage people if you want to go to more than one action station. The goal, just to be clear, we are not there to say someone should, someone oughta. It's about what are the things that you are going to do, to commit to doing, even if it's just to help, nudge things along, around those action stations, around those topics. So have the conversations, but then write up and use your post-it notes and your Sharpies, write up the actions that you will commit to taking. Feel free to add your name if you want to, or a pseudonym, or no name, but either way, it's going to be a very powerful outcome from today's proceedings to be able to say, here is a bunch of actions that a group of people have committed to doing, even if it's anonymously. So please break for lunch. Thank you all so much, and we'll convene after lunch. Cheers.
Okay, I want to start off and say, first of all, a very big thank you for everyone in the room for giving up your Saturday. I've had a fantastic time. I've had some really good conversations. And Pia only asked me to stand up and speak about 3 minutes ago, so I apologise if this is a little bit rambling. I'm going to start with a quote that I misquoted terribly to Pia earlier, which was, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." No, I was trying to say that to you earlier and I balked it completely. That was Margaret Mead, not me. Right. So 10 years is a long time and a lot has changed for good and for bad. Nick started off telling us about everything that happened in the task force and some of the big different things that they tried to do, mostly successful, and all the recommendations were accepted, mostly. But this is my big notes from Nick's talk, where the recommendations were accepted, but implementation is hard. Pia told us a bit more about what has happened since then and the initial implementation, some of the big stuff that we did, the blogging, the wins we had, and then she talked about pockets of awesome, which I think is awesome. A lot of them at a federal level, but I think even more so at the state level, and we didn't have time to collect as many as we knew were out there. So thanks for Alison particularly for informing that, but also James. Then we got in the room and we talked through all of those 7 different topics, and I think there was a lot of conversation that wasn't those topics too, but it was all amazing. Some of the ones that I particularly were interested in today were the data, the institutional amnesia, but I think public service collaboration got the most I wills and the most post-its on the end, which is always good to see. One that didn't make it to the shortlist but has come up a lot and actually turned up in a lot of the different topics was evidence-based policy as well, and there was a lot of conversation around that. Also a bit of talk about things like GovHack and putting them into a more, giving them better structure in some ways and more sustainability, things like putting them to charitable frameworks and stuff like that. Always more conversation about formats for linked data, thanks Laurent. But also leadership and cultural change, and the problems are not the technology. If they ever were, I don't know, but the problems that I've dealt with or that we've talked about today, very few of them are about the technology. It's the people, right? What else do I want to say? When we finally got in the room and started discussing all those topics, the conversations were many and varied and quite passionate, which is always good to see at this time of day. And we filled up the boards very, very quickly with shoulds. Somebody should, National Archives should, public service should, there is a lack of mentors, there is a lot of documentation, there's a lot of fragility in our system. It was much, much harder to come up with the I will statements. So I'm really happy that we ended up with so many on the board. And please, please, please make sure that you keep adding them to Slido. That would be really helpful. The final conversation that we were part of was about revolution and change. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. We were talking about how a revolution starts. And it really only takes 3% of the population to be the tipping point to make a big revolutionary change. I don't think what we're talking about here is whole of government, is whole of country revolution, but it's a big change that we are aiming towards. And I think we might not be 3%, but we're a very good starting point. That's really all I had to say.
We have so many brains and so many hearts that it's wonderful. So what I thought I'd do just for the record and for the live stream is just wrap up with some of the things that are coming in on the Slido. Partly because we haven't quite figured out how to make this public yet, but we will straight after this. So just for the record and for those playing along at home, I'm going to start at the bottom and then move my way up, and just in the way that only I can speak quite this fast and get away with it, quickly go through some of the I wills that people have brought. And it is an interesting point. A lot of shoulds got up there, and to then go back around and encourage everyone to say, but what will you do? And one person said, but then it's just me and my little team doing my little thing. It's like, yeah, but if you say that you're going to do that, then anyone else that reads it will be like, oh, I can do that. You know, the more possible something is, the more probable it is.
So I will redouble the fight to get evaluation and research available online. Shelby, thank you. I will form, investigate, and evaluation community practice. Also, Shelby. I will run an evaluation boot camp to discuss common problems, share knowledge, and learn new things. I think we're all going to come and just hang out with Shelby. I will reach people about data security and online privacy. I will learn about, then advocate and lobby for an Indigenous data sovereignty organisation. Oh, that would be amazing. Whoever said that and anyone interested in that, please have a look over the ditch at some of the stuff happening in New Zealand. There's some really good work happening in that space over there. I will think and act more strategically and less tactically with regard to whole of government. Amazing. I will share my experiences of the public sector, I will share my expectations of the public sector, and I will share the experiences I've had from corporates, good, versus public sector, bad, from Jax. Thank you. I will dance as though no one's watching. Whoever said that is my hero today. Because I was made to say this, I will run an event a year from now, but actually the next, that was me, actually I like the other one even better. Let's propose an annual unparliament to be held at Old Parliament House. It's just the perfect place for this kind of thing, and maybe that would be a great thing to partner with our friends from Democracy 2025 on. Someone put a whole bunch of stuff around participatory governance, which is great, around sharing learnings, around supporting design research community in Australia, in Canberra, participate in civil society. There's a lot of great things here. I'm assuming this person premised all of this with I will, so that's great. I look forward to seeing all of that. I'll create a space for colleagues in my area to advertise things they're interested in talking about or working with someone on that. That's a small but critical thing. Visualise government open data and blog it. From Agile, trust in the public sector will be improved when I work to make sure that no single ID system is implemented or tried to be implemented. Okay, good. I will pair up with someone in my department but outside my silo to work on some challenges and opportunities over the next 12 months. Nat, government systems will be better when I encourage the creation and acceptance of live data systems to data reporting dashboards are more meaningful. I will tell agencies they need to set up labs to create an easy space for, and for opportunities to fail. That's a very technical one. I'm assuming that's Laurent. Is it? Yes. Is it you? Okay. A whole bunch of linked data stuff. So, publishing the first RDF HDT dataset and org, a self-contained knowledge graph via the Australian Government Linked Data Working Group, which I happen to know the acronym of, on data.gov.au as a test, an example of a way of exchanging more data that's more self-explainable and bringing more value. I will create a survey around the barriers of entry for public servant roles and publish the results in a public domain. Ooh, I will specifically look into the barriers for people from minority backgrounds, from Amy. That's an awesome idea. I will organise a GovPub session. Fantastic. There's going to be more. There's a lot more I wills in there that will get reported. And what we might do is... What time is it? It is. I'm going to... Was there anyone else that wanted to share anything from the day, here now, or that wants to advertise something that they're doing here now to the rest of the group? Everyone's probably tired by this time. Come. Okay, I'm inviting to the stage one of my favourite people, Alex Sadlier, who has been here, one of the drivers of all of this in Australia for a long, long time. Welcome.
Yeah, this is completely an ad, and Sharon actually mentioned to me that there is GovTeams, and there's also communities.gov.au. So there are some spaces where you can go inside the public service, form communities of practice that are nice and safe. Communities is a bit open, but...
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Awesome. Form a team today. All right then. What I might do quickly, I'm going to finish with Nicholas. Did you want to say anything, Harley? You're the only sponsor that hasn't been able to get up and chat yet.
I'm happy for you.
TheSpainPlayer.com.
This is almost an ad. I want to say that the conversations today have been fantastic, and the ideas, the I will ideas that have been written up on those boards are fantastic. I will give you a platform to share them in any way that you want to, in any way that could involve some of the thousands of people that we reach, to get them involved and get them participating. Hit me up and grab my details here.
Cool. Wonderful, thank you. So I will just quickly say a last, yes? Okay, one more thing. Up at the microphone. Yeah. There's people watching.
This one? One more thing. In the public service...
Closer?
Yeah. Okay. In the public service collaboration thing, I put my hand up and said I would organise a GovPub conversation. Are Are you guys happy collectively for me to email that out to everyone who's turned up today? Is anybody unhappy?
If anyone's unhappy for their email address to be included in that, please let one of the organisers know straight after this. Otherwise, we will use this list of people just one more time, which is to invite to that. Otherwise, as per normal privacy, we won't use it for any other purpose. Is that right? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to say from a sponsor perspective? No? Okay, so what we might do then is I might invite Nick back up to the stage to help wrap up this fabulous day. Thank you.
Thanks, Pia. I actually just asked Pia a while ago for a tiny amount of time at the end to thank some people, but, you know, there's quite a bit of time. I won't, no, I promise I won't spend a lot of time, but the way Pia introduced me did seem to suggest that I was going to wrap up and say various things, and I did. So let me just put something to you, which is that our system of government has two sort of fundamental assumptions, and those assumptions are so fundamental that we often don't understand that we're making them. One is that all decisions made in government need somehow to, in principle sense, flow down from some central source of sovereignty, and how do we determine that sovereignty? Well, we vote. The other, and therefore if you're doing something, you can point to a relevant act and a relevant instrument and say, I'm doing this for this reason. The other part of the system is competition. So we think that the only way to be democratic, other than direct democracy, which isn't such a great idea in my opinion, is to hold an election. And an election is a competitive event. And we are starting to see, if I asked you the question, what could possibly be wrong with asking people to vote for one of two or three or four or five parties, we are starting to see what could possibly be wrong with that. There is one other mechanism to which Pia alluded in a way when she was talking about doing a project and making herself and her team accountable for results as experienced by users. And that's not a competitive process. And that's a process of the pyramid of sovereignty breaking out into a different kind, something with different intimations of democracy. And those intimations of democracy come to us from 2,500 years ago, because the Athenians didn't use elections hardly at all. What they used was random selection. What they said was a democracy is a thing which involves ordinary people, listen carefully, taking turns in governing and being governed. And the system of democracy we have would have been called by Aristotle a system of elective aristocracy if it was working well, or elective oligarchy if it wasn't working well. And you can take your pick how you want to characterise the democracy we have here, and the democracy that is organising Brexit, and the democracy in the United States. But I think we are in a very, very difficult, a very nasty time. And people with my background know that when bad things happen, what comes after bad things could be better things or catastrophic things. And there are certainly plenty of people who have used the 30s as an analogy of where we are. Who knows? That's up to us. But the idea of constituting democratic legitimacy from ordinary people deliberating on things, I think, is a lifeline, and I've been basing my own thinking and advocacy on that for 5 or more years. So here endeth the sermon. I asked Pia for a couple of minutes at the end because I thought some thank yous were in order. The first thank you that is in order, these are people who are often unsung, is the person who cooked up this idea and made it happen, and he is with us, Michael Griffith, who was in Lindsay Tanner's office. And it wasn't just a matter of thinking of an idea and saying to the minister, let's do this. It involved a lot of perseverance, a lot of nous. Michael helped a great deal in the task force. I can feel you all wanting to applaud, so I better let you do so. Michael is there. There's another person who is not here either. He may be out there. Hello if you are, John. Who announced when we arrived and we constituted this slightly hippie-like outfit.
Inspires me every day, every day. And I want to give my biggest heartfelt thanks to Gavin. Actually, let's do it one time. For Gavin, thank you so much. To Alison, thank you. Kristin, thank you. And also to Ruth out there, thank you. We had a few other people get together at the very beginning of this who were very encouraging. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I think we had a couple of other people on that early call that I'm going to forget. Sorry? Craig, of course. Craig. Thank you, Craig. We and there was one more. Oh, and Tim and Audrey from, I already said Mike. I already said twice though. Good. And we had a few people in Sydney who've been tuning in and participating with great aplomb. So thank you. But the thing is that we need to support each other in all of this stuff because we all want to do a good thing, and there are many more that want to do a good thing. So just to go back to Kristin's point, and then I think we're ready to pretty much wrap up. I will help Pia ensure those flowers stay alive. Thank you, Nat. So just to finalise, just to go back to Kristin's point. That 3% thing, I think, gives a lot of hope. I think a lot of people think that the system's too big, it's too unwieldy, it's too established, it's too set, it's too. And I think that it is only by the efforts of all of us individually, then supporting and helping others, that we do make the difference, and we are making the difference. So thank you all so much for coming, and let's wrap up just a little bit early. Really appreciate it.